The dust swirled around them, an unwelcome companion on their endless journey. It clung to their worn clothing, caked their faces, and permeated every breath they took. This was the Solís family, a nomadic clan etched by poverty and a relentless search for sustenance. Their arrival in the remote Mexican village was less an entrance and more a silent, weary materialization from the parched landscape. Houses, built of sun-baked adobe and roofed with rough thatch, huddled together as if seeking collective comfort against the vast, unforgiving emptiness that surrounded them. The villagers, their faces etched with the harsh realities of their own desperate existence, watched the newcomers with a mixture of apprehension and a deeply ingrained suspicion. Outsiders were rare, and usually they brought trouble, not salvation. Children, their eyes wide and curious, peeked from doorways, quickly retreating at a sharp word from their elders. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, each glance a silent query into the Solís family's intentions. They were a ragged assortment, their belongings few and tied precariously to the backs of their scrawny burros. Yet, even amidst the grime and exhaustion, one figure stood out: Magdalena Solís. She was young, perhaps barely out of her teens, her features not conventionally beautiful, but possessing an undeniable, almost magnetic quality. Her eyes, dark and deep, held a peculiar intensity that seemed to pierce through the villagers' wary gazes. There was a confidence in her posture, a subtle grace in her movements that belied their impoverished state. As the family slowly made their way through the village's main dusty thoroughfare, Magdalena met the stares head-on, not with defiance, but with a quiet, knowing acknowledgement. It was as if she understood their fears, and perhaps even their unspoken hopes. The Solís family was an enigma, a sudden, uninvited presence in a community that had learned to distrust anything new. Their faces were unfamiliar, their customs unknown. Whispers, soft as the desert wind, began to circulate, fueled by an ancient fear of the unknown. Some speculated they were vagrants. Others whispered of darker origins, perhaps even sorcery. The village elders, their faces lined with years of hardship and superstition, convened in hushed tones, their eyes frequently straying towards the small camp the Solís family had established on the outskirts near the dry riverbed. Magdalena, however, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of distrust. Or perhaps she merely chose to ignore them. There was an aura about her, a quiet strength that drew attention even when she sought none. She moved among her family with an easy authority. Her voice, when she spoke, a low, melodic hum that carried a strange, soothing resonance. Even in their initial days of settling, she was the one who seemed to orchestrate their efforts, her suggestions listened to, her presence commanding a quiet respect from her own kin. It was clear even then that Magdalena was more than just a member of the Solís family. She was its beating heart, its guiding spirit. Her charisma was a subtle force, not overtly powerful, but deeply persuasive. It was in the way she listened, her gaze unwavering, making one feel truly heard. It was in the gentle tilt of her head, the slight smile that played on her lips, hinting at a wisdom beyond her years. The villagers, despite their initial wariness, found their eyes drawn to her, a strange curiosity blossoming amidst their fear. She possessed an uncanny ability to soothe ruffled feathers, to calm anxious minds even from a distance. It was a gift, some might say, or perhaps something far more profound, and potentially far more dangerous. The seeds of something extraordinary, something terrifying, were beginning to germinate in this forgotten corner of the world, nurtured by desperation and the quiet power of Magdalena Solís. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The subtle force of Magdalena's charisma, a silent yet potent current, began to ripple through the stagnant waters of the village's suspicion. It was not an immediate triumph, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of the village's entrenched distrust. Initially, her interactions were simple, exchanges of a quiet nod, a gentle smile offered to those who dared to meet her gaze. She would often be seen tending to the family's meager campsite, her movements deliberate, her presence exuding an unshakable calm that gradually piqued the villagers' curiosity. Children, bolder than their parents, were the first to approach, drawn by her serene demeanor. Magdalena would offer them small, intricately carved wooden trinkets, simple gestures that spoke volumes in a community starved for kindness. These small acts of grace began to chip away at the hardened shell of apprehension. The elders, initially so wary, found themselves observing her with a different kind of scrutiny. They saw not a cunning trickster, but a young woman who carried herself with an unusual dignity, whose dark eyes held an intelligent spark. Whispers of sorcery did not entirely vanish, but they morphed, taking on a new tone. Perhaps not malicious magic, but a benevolent, almost spiritual gift. The village, desperate for anything that might offer a glimmer of hope in their bleak existence, found itself slowly, cautiously opening up to the Solís family, primarily through the quiet influence of Magdalena. The turning point was subtle, almost accidental. A severe drought had gripped the region for months, parching the earth and withering crops. The villagers' despair was palpable, a heavy shroud over their daily lives. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Magdalena sat by a small fire, seemingly lost in thought. A group of villagers, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and their own gnawing hopelessness, gathered at a respectful distance. Without looking up, Magdalena began to hum a low, resonant tune, a melody unlike any they had ever heard. It was ancient, mournful, yet imbued with a strange, compelling power. As her voice filled the twilight air, a light breeze, cool and unexpected, rustled through the parched leaves of the mesquite trees. The next morning, a faint mist clung to the ground, a phenomenon unheard of during the drought. It was not rain, but it was enough to stir a flicker of hope. The villagers looked at Magdalena with new eyes, a sense of awe mingling with their lingering suspicion. Was it coincidence, or was it something more? Magdalena offered no explanation, merely a serene smile that deepened the mystery surrounding her. From that day forward, the villagers began to approach her, hesitant at first, then with increasing confidence, seeking her counsel, her quiet wisdom, her unspoken blessings. She became an unofficial oracle, a beacon of solace in their desolate lives. Her influence grew exponentially. She possessed an uncanny ability to intuit their unspoken fears, to offer words of comfort that resonated deeply within their souls. She never claimed divine power, never spoke of miracles, yet her presence seemed to bring a sense of calm, a fragile peace to their troubled hearts. The Solís family, once ostracized, found themselves slowly integrated into the village fabric, their survival now intertwined with the growing reverence for Magdalena. She was no longer just an outsider, she was becoming something far more profound, a figure of nascent spiritual authority, her charisma transforming into a captivating, almost hypnotic sway over the desperate populace. The seeds of her legend were now firmly planted, watered by the villagers' fervent need for salvation. The villagers, consumed by a newfound devotion, began to interpret every small blessing, every inexplicable turn of fortune, as a direct result of Magdalena's quiet presence. A healthier harvest, a child recovering from illness, even a brief respite from the relentless heat, all were attributed to her burgeoning spiritual power. The whispers of sorcery had now transformed into declarations of her divine connection, a belief that she was a conduit for ancient forces, a healer, a prophet. This burgeoning faith, born of desperation, quickly spiraled into something far more intense, far more demanding. The villagers, once cautious, now sought to serve her, to prove their loyalty, their reverence. They brought her offerings, meager possessions, and their deepest secrets, laying them at her feet as if before an altar. Magdalena, in turn, subtly shifted her role. No longer merely a serene observer, she began to accept this mantle of spiritual leadership. Her pronouncements grew more authoritative, her guidance more direct. She spoke of ancient spirits, of forgotten rituals, of a path to prosperity and salvation that lay within her understanding alone. The Solís family, once her silent support, now became her acolytes, their roles defined by her growing influence. They facilitated the villagers' access to her, managed the offerings, and disseminated her words, solidifying her position as the undeniable center of their world. The line between healer and deity blurred, then vanished entirely as Magdalena embraced the power flowing towards her. The rituals grew more elaborate, more frequent. What began as simple gatherings around a fire evolved into fervent ceremonies, often held under the cloak of night, away from prying eyes. Magdalena presided over these events with an almost hypnotic grace. Her voice, once a gentle hum, now resonated with a primal authority, weaving tales of mystical power and promises of abundance. The villagers, desperate for relief from their harsh realities, surrendered themselves completely to her guidance, their minds open, their wills pliable. They performed tasks she assigned, chanted the words she taught, their faith deepening with each passing day. With this absolute devotion came a darker edge. Magdalena, now firmly entrenched as a spiritual leader, began to demand more significant sacrifices. Initially, these were symbolic, a lock of hair, a treasured possession. But as her power grew, and as the villagers' desperation intensified, the demands escalated. She spoke of appeasing wrathful spirits, of the need for true dedication, for ultimate surrender. The village, isolated and increasingly cut off from the outside world by its fervent new faith, became a closed system, its reality defined solely by Magdalena's words. Fear, intertwined with devotion, became the most potent tool in her arsenal. The first true sacrifice was not of an animal, but of a villager's will. A young man, who dared to question one of Magdalena's more unusual pronouncements, was publicly admonished, ostracized by his own family and friends, until he recanted, broken and humiliated. This act sent a chilling message. Dissent would not be tolerated. The villagers, witnessing the swift and brutal consequence of defiance, pledged their obedience even more fiercely. It was a terrifying transformation, the evolution of a community yearning for hope into a cult driven by fear and absolute submission. Magdalena's eyes, once holding a gentle wisdom, now gleamed with an unyielding conviction, reflecting the terrifying power she wielded. She was no longer just Magdalena Solís, the charismatic outsider. She was the blood priestess, the divine conduit, the ultimate authority. Her reign was absolute, her words law. The remote Mexican village, once a place of quiet despair, had become the stage for a chilling drama of human vulnerability and unchecked power. A testament to how easily hope can curdle into fanaticism when nurtured by desperation and the hypnotic sway of a charismatic leader. The legend of Magdalena Solís, the blood priestess, was now fully formed, etched in the terrified devotion of her followers, a dark chapter in the annals of human credulity.